Fantastic. Well, welcome everyone, and thanks for coming along this morning. Please do ask questions as we go, because it'd be great if we can have a bit of a dialogue rather than just listening to me rabbit on about what we do. Quick show of hands, who knows of the National Trust? That's pretty good. Well, for those of you who don't, you can actually buy memberships or donate, so do feel free to do so as we go through. And it's available obviously on digital channels. The National Trust is the biggest conservation charity in Europe. We look after natural and historical places so that people and nature can thrive. What we have to do is do that forever, though, and for everyone. So as you can imagine, there's quite a few challenges involved in that statement. We are also the largest farming organisation in Europe. We look after about 250,000 hectares of land. We have around about just under 6 million members, about 25 million paying visitors a year, and around about 200 million non-paying visitors. The reason I say around about is because we've actually got no idea whatsoever, because we don't measure that. We just open those places up so that they are literally there for everyone. We also, talking to a colleague there, we're also a large landlord. We look after about 8,000 tenanted properties. We have about 500 major visitor sites, a lot of which, for those of you who've managed to see the beautiful Scion house here, are very similar in that sort of, big country house, big estate, so that people can come along and enjoy both the history and the nature of the place. But what I'm going to talk to you a little bit about today is our digital transformation journey within a heritage organisation. And the reason I say that is actually because it can be quite challenging. Firstly, when you start to think about where are you coming from, and I'd commend to anybody as you're setting out on a digital transformation, unless you're a startup, you will have some sort of baggage. Yeah, you will have some sort of challenge, whether it's a legacy system or whether it's a bit of inertia in the organisation about the way things are done. For me, the first big challenge was, what the heck do you do with places like this? Now, this is a photograph I took in a place called Bransdale. Now, my background was in military communications, technology and intelligence services, and thinking about why have you positioned your satellite dish there? Because that's a really terrible place to put it, not least because the chickens will be attacking it every day. And the reason was they put it on the roof and it blew off in the first winter storm. So connectivity to remote places, challenge number one. Now, I know that not every organisation struggles with that, but for me, one of the initial things you've got to understand on a transformation journey is what you've got to do in order to build the foundations. Favourite topic of everyone's at the minute, apart from the board at OpenAI, is AI, obviously. But if you try and do a transformation involving the use of AI and you haven't got the foundations in place, good luck with that. Yeah, because that's really challenging. So we've got to get the foundations right. And for me, first of all, that was how do we build a resilient network? And we had to literally put fibre optic cable into the ground and connect the miles of gaps between where BT Openreach stopped and our places. Some historical person in the past had decided that they were going to plonk their country house there. Yeah, please.
So just the basic one. What was the kind of vision for, because obviously digitalisation and the digital transformation journey, everyone has that in their organisation, and it means different things to different people. What did it actually mean for you lot as an organisation?
Yes.
Because you're talking about the infrastructure, but what was actually the vision? What did you set out to?
So the vision was quite simple, is how do we enable the strategy of the National Trust? Yeah, the National Trust has got a very clear strategy, which is about how do we look after, promote and protect for the permanent preservation of places of its historical interest and outstanding natural beauty forever for everyone. So that is the vision of the organisation. The digital strategy for the organisation, because we're not a digital startup, we're not going to start doing a completely different line of business, was how do we make that happen? Yeah, and if you've got almost 500 visitor sites and all those sort of tenancy areas and other activities that you're doing, you have to be able to connect them all together as a start point. So our vision was very much about how do we enable the organisation to achieve its purpose. Yeah, and I know for other organisations it will be a specific digital vision, but for me, this is an enabling capability for our wider aim. Okay. So the next piece for me is decide where you want to be on this graph. I mean, this graph is a very, very basic description of a complex challenge. Are you an organisation that, for example, your vision means you have to be on the leading edge of technology? Because if you're not, you're actually a technology business, then you are going to lose market share and you're going to struggle. Now, wherever you go, though, on this graph, you have to invest. The reason being, if you don't, then obviously you'll be into the declining capability. And we all know of organisations who struggle with that. Mine was one of them. I'll be honest with you, hadn't been investing in tech for a long time when I arrived at the organisation, and so changing that conversation so that people recognise this was a necessary thing to invest in and invest quite significantly. And that's just to keep on that continuous improvement cycle. And for those of you who know the world of digital well, you realise the timescales are a lot sharper and you can become very irrelevant very quickly. And I'd say that is accelerating. So that, if people aren't continuously thinking how do they remain relevant, then they're going to fall behind very quickly. There's also this question of risk when investing in digital capability in an organisation. Does anybody recognise this place? So the reason I use this is when trying to understand from my board and my trustees' perspective, what did they understand by the concept of risk? And I soon began to understand that at the time, cyber risk was, yes, a thing. The fact of having unresilient systems, so that for business continuity perspective, was a thing, but they didn't really get it. What they did get was this. This is a picture of Clarendon House. For those of you who don't recognise it, you may remember this. It happened about 10 years ago. Okay, and Clarendon House completely burnt. Yeah. That is what my organisation understands as serious risk to the organisation. It's losing, hopefully once in a generation, losing country houses like this. For those of you who are familiar with the history of the National Trust, this used to be happening about once a week in the UK. It's one of the reasons why we look after about 500 of these places, because of a certain thing called inheritance tax when you've got no money. And so we were seeing that people were burning these places to the ground because they could not afford to pay the inheritance tax. And so that's where the then quite forward-looking Chancellor of the Exchequer actually stepped in the 30s and 40s, said, if you give your stately home to the government, we will accept that in lieu of inheritance tax. And he then gave them to the National Trust. But came at the price. We then had to look after those places forever. And any of you who live in an old house who perhaps realise that that's quite an expensive business trying to keep these places there. But when we talk about risk then, what we need to do, rather than just talking about it in digital terms, is talk about it in terms of what's the business benefit that you're going to lose if you don't make this investment. And changing that sort of conversation around really helped me in getting the investment that we needed. Then looking at what are the opportunities. Now, what we looked at here is basically looking at what Gartner suggests, that if you're going to look at an organisation, you look at it holistically. So the first thing for me is thinking about our digital workplace, thinking about how we engage with our audiences, what products and services do we offer that could be digitally augmented or could be digital in their own right. Thinking about visitor experiences. Really challenging in some of our places when we think about digitising those. One, because we've got so many of them, and two, having that ubiquitous network that many in-visit digital experiences rely upon actually is really quite hard. And then thinking about asset management. What do I mean by that? I mean digital conservation, or digitally enabling the conservation of assets, be that old historical places, collections. We have more than 1 million objects that we look after in our collection. Or whether we're talking about nature itself and how we conserve nature for future generations. And then thinking about new digital ventures. So there is no reason why organisations can't think about, perhaps if they've got, they're an old brand like ours that's well established, about how can you use the concept of a new venture to broaden your reach as an organisation. Maybe working in partnership with others, so that you can do new things that perhaps you're not able to do within the constraints of your own mission. And digital can be a real enabler for things like new joint ventures or partnership working. But the important thing is, with most of this, we're not starting from scratch, and making sure you build that solid foundation. And yes, it won't be even in all areas, but thinking about what you need to do to get the basics right. And for us, getting the basics right sounds really straightforward. Actually, the reality is delivering lots and lots of really complex change projects and programs in order to make that whole thing work across the organization. And I'll come back to some of those. But then what we need to do is think about what's our level of ambition. So we talked about, digital vision before. What does that mean for your organization? And set that bar across all of these areas so that you've got a clear understanding of what you're trying to achieve in each area of the business. And then set about working in, could be macro or micro innovation work, it could be thinking about major projects and change programs that you need to do, but how do you build that into a delivery capability across the whole organization that doesn't mean you're not trying to deliver it in a monolithic way? Because generally, in my experience, and I've been through a few of these, is those big transformation programs don't work. Why? Because you've got too many business stakeholders who have got different aspirations and ambitions. So you have to be able to divide it up, make the sort of thing achievable in smaller scales, but deliver it as a single coherent thing. And then, obviously, the theory is it'll all work and your capability will rise up to that level of ambition and everything works. You also need to change the way of thinking about delivering because traditional project program management methodologies, they do have limitations, particularly if you're trying to introduce innovative ways of working and thinking. And so really, yes, you will still need some waterfall projects, and I'm sure many of you, like me, have a very waterfall-based financial approval mechanism in the organization, which, you have to work within that. Don't try and break it because you'll fail. Come up with a prioritized list of great ideas. What are the business opportunities you're trying to exploit to reach that level of ambition? And the reason I say the prioritize is because generally, if you work in an organization, you'll have more ideas than you'll have capacity to deliver. So you've got to think about how you make that work. Go straight into design thinking at an enterprise level, though. Putting your users, of whatever those users are, actually at the heart of it, but thinking big. Now, the reason I say that is we've had a lot of learning where innovation is introduced at a small scale and then it just won't scale, because it ends up being a tactical solution. But people try and turn that into business critical systems, and it just doesn't work. It's not been designed for operating at that sort of scale. And I mentioned the foundations before. So, if you've spent, like we did, 3 years delivering a fantastic, new membership and fundraising capability on Salesforce, you then don't come and introduce a completely different platform to do, a sort of another business activity when it can cope with it. Why? Because generally that will cause you more problems with integration, with data, and all of those things. But once you've done that big thinking, go small. Don't let, trying to deliver something massive hinder your progress. Think about prototyping, rapidly innovate, get that testing and learning cycle going, and then make a decision. Did it work? Didn't it? If it didn't, kill it. If it does, think about how can you then pilot it? How can you then, take that so that it can actually operate with live customer data, how it could work at a live site, all those types of things. And then take that final decision that says, is this something we're going to invest in? And if it is, you can scale it. And you can scale it actually quite easily because you did the design thinking up front. And then, if you're developing a sort of product and service sort of life cycle, you go into that continuous improvement spin cycle until such point as you need to kill it off because you've got something bigger and better and new coming through. Yeah. There's no microphone coming now. Just all right. I'm sure we can hear you. Yeah.
So I'm intrigued to understand, obviously, because you were the CIO, who did you actually have as your leadership team? Because obviously you still got run and execution, and BAU,
definitely.
and keep the lights on, and then you've got this, new exciting stuff happening in one corner, and then your team is like, well, actually that looks really cool, but I'm doing just keeping these lights on. Were you working with a partnership? Did you have another?
Did both. So, funny the sentence there. So it's a partnership, a collaborative team way of working. The concept we refer to is fusion teams, where you're bringing your IT, your technologists together with your business owners of what's the capability, what's the business outcome you're trying to achieve, and partners. So working with suppliers, whoever wants to, because National Trust, we're not a technology company. We have to bring in that type of expertise and support to help us on that journey. The key thing is coordinating it, though, across the whole, so that you don't have one team rushing off in one direction and another team going in another direction. Actually working with those suppliers as well, really understanding what's the capability they're going to bring, how they're going to work with you in that collaborative way, because it's not easy if you're a partner organisation that comes into an organisation, doesn't understand the culture, doesn't understand the ways of working and the nuances, has to learn the business and then get delivering. For that major Salesforce implementation I mentioned, we got through the initial design phase of that. 30th of January 2020, I signed the contract and we started on that implementation. I was about to fly out to India in February 2020 with what was then Atos, our implementation partner. And what happened in March 2020, does anyone remember? Wasn't my finest moment, I'll be honest with you, in terms of horizon scanning of what could go wrong to the program. And yeah, that became really challenging, as delivering that capability at a time when organisationally we had to close every single property because of the lockdown. We had to send people on furlough just to make sure the costs, of running the organisation could be met. And then, you had that challenge of working with a partner with largely offshore development resources in India in a situation where we couldn't get to know them other than, how we all sort of operated on WebEx and Teams and Zoom at the time. But we made it work. It probably took us longer as an implementation in order to do that. But they've got to be part of the team. And I think that was one of my biggest learnings of how do you build those teams when things are remote in that way. I think the other things here, you've got to have that, you've got to coordinate the thing. You've got to be understanding about how does this whole portfolio of digital transformation actually work. Make sure you've got skilled teams. Make sure you empower them as well so that they can take decisions within a framework in order to maintain that sort of pace of delivery that you need. And really, I can't emphasize this enough, putting the users first. It doesn't matter whether it's a user of an HR system or whether it's a potential donor that's coming into the organisation. You've got to really think about what do they need from you. I was thinking, sorry, yeah, go for it.
How do you guard against being vendor-driven or supplier-led in terms of, transformation? So, especially when you're not a technology organisation.
Yeah, so it is a challenge, that, and I think actually one of the benefits of coming to sessions like this is actually talk to peers, find out, because someone will have done something similar. It won't be exactly the same as a thing, but be open, be interested, be inquisitive about what other organisations are doing and actually learn from them. So I think that would be number one. Talk to expert organisations, the likes of Gartner and other Forrester, other organisations are available out. There's a lot of information, actually filtering through what's the right stuff, and really get into the detail of what it is you think you're delivering. I'd say also be curious yourself. So as a technology leader, for example, when we started on, we were implementing Salesforce for our membership fundraising, so Service Cloud. We then decided that we were going to implement Experience Cloud. Didn't have quite enough cloud, so we went all in with Marketing Cloud, and then now we're delivering Data Cloud as well. I'm sure there are a few more clouds waiting for us. There is actually. Is there an AI cloud that's just starting now? But one of the things I thought, I'd never done a Salesforce implementation. I'd done a CRM implementation, done ERP implementations, all of that, but never done it on Salesforce. So as a leader, I said, well, I've got to get myself into that space. So I got on, learn, did the courses, understood the technology so that I'd have those conversations, not to become the world's deepest technical expert, because in order to actually identify who were the people in the virtual room who really knew what they were talking about and could actually explain the terms to you that you'd sort of learned about were important in that implementation. And that, to me, did become one of the biggest challenges, is when you've got vendors who are really popular and capabilities that everyone wants a bit of, and dare I say, AI is going to be one of these in its various guises in the next few years. You've actually, those people who are real experts in that are going to become a very scarce resource while they grow capacity to work with all of the organizations. So how do you get underneath, the skin of that supplier and say exactly who has that technical expertise, the know-how that's going to do this, and doesn't have just a sort of, thin veneer of knowledge. You've got to be able to get inside and actually do that. The vendors should be able to help you and actually talk to you about what are the specific skill sets you should be looking, not just from a supplier, but the actual people within that supplier, to make sure that you're really confident. And be clear with them as well. What is it, the thing you're trying to achieve? One of the biggest lessons I learned was about a year into it, and we got a little bit distracted in this part of the program, thinking about the pandemic and keeping the lights on. Cyber security was a big concern at the time, and all of those things going on. And we sort of lost track. We had about 5 different projects that made up this piece of work. But what we weren't doing was looking at it from an end-to-end business outcome for each of those things, and what, cross-cutting across all of those 5 projects, if you like. And what I came to the realization was we were going to deliver 5 projects absolutely brilliantly, and they were not going to talk to each other. And it wasn't going to deliver the transformational outcome that we wanted. So, I worked with the program sponsor, and, very brave lady who I respect so much for this, and said, this is going to be a train wreck if we don't make some changes. And we did. We stopped. We said, right, we've delivered a lot of great stuff. We're going to stop. We're going to reset ourselves. And we implemented scalable, agile frameworks for enterprises. So that's safe working and really looking at those end-to-end business outcomes that we were seeking to achieve. Okay, and what was needed in all aspects, from the data, from the actual technology infrastructure requirements, all of those enablers, and really viewed it in that sort of end-to-end enterprise design way. So that was, a really big learning for us. And it was painful. It was really painful as we switched. Anyway, so in terms of the journey, just to finish this off, I think this is roughly the sort of 4 stages of the journey for me that we've sort of implemented. Where are we on that? We're sort of in between empowering teams, a little bit still of protecting revenue, and lots in realizing our ambitions as well. The building the foundations is the really, really boring stuff that most boards absolutely hate. Thankfully, I've got a really brilliant board who understood that we were not getting. We were trying to run, almost 500,000 visitors per year sites on a 0.5 meg broadband link based on the worst possible copper infrastructure that BT Openreach could provide for us, literally rotting in the ground. And so, you sort of understand the business challenges of why this isn't going to work, and we try and deliver centralized ERP solutions to an organization that can't talk to its central hub. The idea of moving to Microsoft 365 services for staff and volunteers at one of our places when there's no mobile phone signal, there's no broadband connection, it's a go figure. So a lot of that, thinking about protecting revenue, if everything you're doing as an organization depends on the revenue coming from membership and fundraising, you really don't want that to be your most unreliable and worst system. So you've got to think about where's the maximum value for the organization so that it can then do the additional things because it's got the revenue to do that. Thinking about empowering our teams, we're still on that journey. Thinking about a digital workplace, what does that actually mean? Most organizations that I work with, it's not a great experience being a member of staff. Yeah, why do I say that? Well, you turn up to work in a physical world, It's really easy. You go through the front door or, on the virtual front door. What does that feel like from a digital perspective, though? When you actually turn up for work, how welcoming is that? How much does that put you as an employee at the centre so that everything is really easy and straightforward for you to do? Just throw that challenge out there. Looking at AI, we're experimenting now in the same way that most organisations are, looking at things like co-pilots, digital assistants and all of that stuff. But there's lots to do still. Sorry, you got a question at the back there.
Yeah, just about empowering your teams. So, as an organisation, to a lot of tech-savvy people, this all makes sense. But you deal with, should we say, less tech-savvy volunteers?
Yeah.
Have you had lots of, what are the statistics of pushback, people dropping out of being volunteering because they don't understand it, don't see the benefits? So
our volunteering system's not great, I'll be honest with you. It's not really user-friendly. So what happens? People end up improvising. They use a lot of tick sheets as when who's taking up work for what. They'll use informal WhatsApp groups. They'll do all of those things to work around the system. So it's really high on my priority list of things to do. In terms of whether they're tech savvy enough, actually digital skills is a really important piece to do for all people, whether they be a member of staff or a volunteer. And there's a lot of fear and uncertainty out there. All this talk, I don't know if you heard, organisations say, we're going to save 40% of our staff through AI. Well, firstly, what the heck does that mean? Secondly, that terrifies people because people are seeing their roles and livelihoods under threat. So part of our implementation of AI is first we get the ethics right, we understand what the people implications are, we understand what the privacy and security concerns are, and actually do that and then experiment within that sort of context. But building skills so that people are confident is really hard because you want to make them, I said about the workplace being welcoming, digital workplace needs to be welcoming as well for everyone. So if you've got accessibility needs, you need to consider that. But also, you'll have a broad church of capabilities, whether you're a tech-focused thing. I'll never forget a conversation with two lovely volunteers at one of our places. And one of them, I was, said what my role was, how could we work better with them and all that. And the guy said, I don't want any of this technology stuff. He said, I really don't want anything to do with it. Leave me alone. I've got a pen and paper. I'm happy. Okay, that's Yeah, maybe. He spent a whole career there. And then I spoke with a lady who I didn't realise at the time was his wife. And she said, the most important thing in my life, bar none, is my iPad. And said, you can take him away before you can take that away. And, it sort of really sets that, you're thinking about how people are at different places, different stages in that journey. But you've got to, I think as an organisation, you have to bring everyone with us so that nobody gets left behind in this. So I think we're at time. I don't know if there are any final questions before we have to wrap.
We have time for maybe one more question. We've got about 1 minute.
While you're finding that, I'd say this is the final point I'd leave you on, that this stuff is really hard. It really is hard. It is a lot of thinking, a lot of planning, a lot of buy-in, a lot of stakeholder engagement, and I hope there's no vendors in the room. No matter what people tell you, there is no easy answer to this. Even the stuff that's an easy answer is actually really hard to implement. So, be prepared for the hard yards. That's all I'd say.
I really enjoyed it. It's really good. Just a question on when does your transformation just become the day-to-day?
Yeah. I think the word transformation has got a utility, but it's also got a risk associated with it, because as soon as you say we're going to transform, people see there's a start point and there's an end point. And that's why I'll use transformation externally. I don't use the phrase internally. And it's precisely for that reason. There is no end to this because, if we go back 3 years, who would have thought that AI would have such an impact on organisations' thinking as it is right now? The answer is probably not many. And that's only 3 years ago, okay? So what's going to happen in the next 3 years? I've got no idea. Yeah, we can come up with a roadmap of activities that we're going to do. We can think, how we'll be responsive, adaptive, all of those things. But we don't know what the next big change in technology is going to be. When we look at AI and what it's doing, I actually developed my first machine learning engine back in 1997 when I was an undergraduate. Feels like an awfully long time ago. What's that going to be in another 3 to 5 years with all of the investment that's going into developing the various AI technologies? I don't think it's going to be just about, you know, large language models and things like that and co-pilots. It's going to go way beyond that. So the challenge is going to be, how do you remain responsive and adaptive as an organisation to embrace those changes? And I think that's the reality. It's a blessing for all us who work in technology until we're all replaced by AI, obviously. But you know, it means that it's never ending. It's an exciting place to be because it's so constantly changing and evolving.